the trip to Japan this time around is merely for promotional reasons?
Yes, and to discuss future projects here in Japan. Yeah,
such
as live tour, live video, live album.
Mm-hmm. It's been quite a while since you've been here, actually come to Japan.
We were here in 1977.
Yeah.
And,
15 years.
15 years ago. It is quite a long time, really.
We are regular, though, every 15 years.
Yeah, come on, we'll be back in 15 years.
I see we are like.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Great.
Hit you with a question you've probably been bombarded with, but why is the band being revived after the 9-year hiatus?
In '87, Polydor put a record out in England called Changing Faces, which was the greatest hits of 10cc and Godley and Cream. And it went platinum very quickly. And they did some market research as to how a new studio album would be taken by the public. And when we got together to accept these platinum discs for Changing Faces, they asked us if we'd like to, Eric and I'd like to get together again and do a new album. And we said we would, try it and see what happened.
Do they actually do market research, like focus groups
Yeah,
on fans?
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's more like a hit or miss type of proposition.
Oh, no.
You're kidding.
No.
If you look at the credibility of the band, and in Britain, strangely enough, we were honest. After 8 years of never releasing anything, we were on a par with Pink Floyd as far as public recognition and acceptability of product was concerned. This sounds like real market research stuff, and it's incredibly boring, but the facts are the facts. Facts are the facts, and they obviously knew that there's a public out there for a new album, so they asked us to do one.
Now the band formally disbanded at one point, like in '83. Or did you actually formally announce your...
We didn't know. We never formally disbanded. We just ceased to...
Stop working?
It just sort of... We did a tour. What had happened was that since probably sort of 78, 79, we hadn't really had any big hit singles. But we kept touring, and we used to, do very well on tour, but it became increasingly like a nostalgia. People were only coming to hear the old material. They weren't interested in the new recordings we were making. And I think that sort of finally got to us, and we just we did one tour and never did anything else. So we never did a farewell tour. We never said, well, that's it. It was kind of left open.
You didn't die, you just stopped breathing.
Correct.
We went into hibernation. Went to sleep for a few hundred years. Rip Van Winkle.
I don't interpret for...
If I can just add one more thing there. Hence the title of the new album was Meanwhile. Because everybody said, well, what have you been doing? I said, well, meanwhile, this is it.
Well, I was wondering, he was trying to confirm the reasons for your getting the band together again. What were the actual motivations behind it? And you talk about the market research and how Pink Floyd, you're on the same level as Pink Floyd.
They made us a very generous offer as well.
Okay, but he's also wondering about like personal feelings about the band 10cc, maybe more like emotional reasons for getting the band together again.
Well, the other thing that prompted us to do something for 10cc was we felt personally that there was a huge gap in the market in Britain for what we knew we could do really well. We could write songs that had melody, words, interesting chords, and bloody good sound. We knew we could do that, because that's what we always did. As Graham said, in the early 80s, we weren't in fashion. We came through the punk era, and we weren't the flavour of the month. But there was this gap when we were asked to do this record, and we said, we should fill it, because there are people still out there that want, people of our sort of age group as well, that nobody was catering for.
Something I guess we would call pop music. Pure pop.
Middle of the road pop music, AOR.
Yeah, more AOR really.
AOR.
When you say AOR, what is that?
Adult orientated rock.
Some people think of it as albums.
Oh right, well there is that.
Adult.
Yeah.
でまあちょっと
These are individual questions for each of you about what you were doing during the interim. And the first is for Eric. You worked with Paul McCartney, right?
Yeah.
あれ質問なんだっけそれを振り返ってちゃんと
まず今から思って数作のコラボ
So how do you evaluate the actual work you put out with Paul?
How I rate it.
Yeah, how would you evaluate it?
Um,
Back now in retrospect.
I think the songs written were very good. I think the production of the songs didn't justify the quality that we originally had. But it's not my project, it's Paul's project, it's his album, and he is the king in this case, and I really wasn't in control of anything on that side. So I loved writing with him, and it's very exciting to write with anyone who's been such an influence on music. But in retrospect, I don't think the project went up the right avenue. I think it was led in a different direction, and unfortunately didn't come out as good as I thought it was going to.
How would you go back and change it if you could? Just to get rather hypothetical.
I'd go back to the original backing tracks in the studio and just put Paul's voice on, and the thing would sound like something 2 million times better. The backing tracks are wonderful. There are 4 guys playing, and it's as raw and as exciting as the Beatles. But when you start putting a production on like Hugh Padgham and 2,000 electronic overdubs, the thing it loses its credibility for me. And I've obviously discussed this many times with Paul since, and we agree.
When it was reported that you had collaborated with Paul McCartney, there was talk in certain quarters that he had sort of begun to lose his songwriting skills, or they had begun to deteriorate, and you were sort of the hired gun called on to come in and keep things at a reasonable level.
Many people have said this over the years about Paul because he didn't have this sounding board, John Lennon, to write with. But if you find out about what happened in all the Beatles' writings, you find that many of the great songs weren't written by the two of them anyway. Lady Madonna was Paul, and the Walrus was John, etc., etc. But I think he did need someone to bounce off. Again, in retrospect, I don't think I am a strong enough person. And you are dealing with someone who's been the most successful songwriter in history. It's very difficult to tell somebody like that if you feel he's not coming up to the standard you feel he should. I mean, you do tell him. But it's like the emperor's new clothes. Is he going to believe you? And how far do you want to take it? A lot of politics and head banging involved. So I think on the stuff he's done since the split of the Beatles, there are a couple of albums like the first McCartney album and Ram, which I thought were brilliant.
Yeah.
He just captured it. He had it, and it was still had that
Beatle thing.
But he did get softer on the Wings albums, and a lot of them I didn't like very much. But again, if somebody's done something so good, why should you expect him to be perfect every time he releases something? It's impossible. He's human.
So again, looking back in retrospect, what do you think your final contribution was? And what effects, positive effects, did you have on him in collaborating with him?
Again, as I said, if you could listen to the original backing tracks, you'd find a very raw rock and roll album, which is what I was hoping to influence in my input with his songs, and to get away from some of the softer lyric content of some of his previous albums.
There was something interesting that you told me, because we've obviously talked about Eric writing with Paul, that I found very interesting, that when Eric thought that Paul had sort of started something really, really good, you'd encourage him, and he'd kind of reject it. And when he started something that you thought was bad, he'd want to carry on with it. It was kind of contrary, really.
Yeah.
And I would, trust what Eric liked to be good, judging from what Paul's done in recent years, which I think has been below par.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation to sit and write with somebody, or sit in the studio and start to lay the thing down on tape. And you do hear, he is a genius, there's no doubt about that. You know that from what he's written. The guy's got it in his head. And he can just sit at a piano and start to sing something, and you say, that is great, that is incredible, let's do it. And he'll say, no, we can do better than this, let's do something else. What the reason for that is, I have no idea. I have no idea, but it happens. It's very frustrating. Very frustrating. But, he's got a song on our album with something that we started. Again, here's an example. It's something that we never finished, because he didn't think it was good enough, but I always thought it was a great idea for a song called Don't Break the Promises. I played it to Graham, and Graham saw the potential of it as well. So we completed it, and then Paul rang me up and said, you guys got it. You got it right. It's great. Wonderful. Keep sending the checks.
Because I'm short of money this week.
Are you acquainted with the actual material that Eric and Paul put out? And do you have, can you give us your evaluation on it?
Yes, I did listen to it, obviously. I was actually working with Andrew Gold at the time, and he's a big McCartney fan, and he's a friend of ours anyway. There was one song that I liked a lot. I can't remember the title of the two Signs of the Zodiac. What was it called, that song?
Oh, yeah.
You wrote it?
Yeah, I wrote it. Yeah, another one you mean.
I like that one a lot. I thought it was really good. And the other ones, I thought they were good, but not like the greatest thing I'd ever heard. Generally, for me, after sort of Band on the Run, Paul lost it, and it was no disrespect to Eric that it didn't sort of improve it any, You get the odd flash of thing with McCartney that is great, but it's nothing like his former self.
And Graham, your Wax project
Yes.
has been pretty well received here.
Yeah.
It's been re-released in CD format. In retrospect, what exactly was the concept at work there with Wax?
It was just working with somebody that I enjoyed working with. I met Andrew through. It was because of 10cc that I met Andrew. He was brought in to co-produce and co-write some tracks for an album that we had already recorded in England. But our American label, Warner's, wanted the album to have more of an American sort of slant. So they suggested that we work with an American writer-producer, and that was Andrew.
What did they mean by American?
Well, they thought that by working with an American, that the album would sound more American, or be more suited to the American market. They probably thought it was too English. This is a load of bollocks, isn't it, really? But the good part about it was that we enjoyed working with him. The three tracks actually that Andrew co-wrote and produced with us were all singles. They weren't hits, but it does say a lot for his input that the three tracks that he did, the three of those were singles. And after Eric and I decided that we weren't going to continue with Wax with the 10cc for another 9 years, we were going to have a 9-year break. I'd set up a studio at home, and I was finding it a bit lonesome, so I gave Andrew a ring and asked him to come over to England and just to do some writing with me and see what happened. And we ended up doing an album. It was like a home album done on a 16-track tape recorder, of which 2 singles came out. And but eventually the people that signed us to the label we were with left the label and we were dropped. But because we'd enjoyed working with each other, we decided that we should sort of try again. So we wrote a new lot of songs and eventually signed to RCA, and we did 3 albums for them.
ワックスがいい。
In his own personal opinion, Wax did sound like a sort of a more frivolous and Americanized version of 10cc.
Yeah, I think one of the main differences was in the lyrics. We tended to write kind of more mundane lyrics, if you like. It was kind of very quick, you know. It wasn't sort of as intellectual as 10cc, but we never wanted it to be 10cc. We wanted hit records, and we got some, but that was one of the main things about it. But at the same time, I think musically it had depth, but lyrically I can see quite a big difference. I mean, we did things that were sort of almost like Moon and June, you know. Mm-hmm. But we just felt that suited us at the time.
When you talk about this American thing, I don't quite follow you. How was this manifested in the sound, though? Yeah.
Well, I suppose I don't know how, you know, what it is really that makes something American and something English, except an accent, I suppose. I mean, Andrew's got a very Californian kind of. He sings for sure. It's for sure.
For sure.
You know.
The R is nice and juicy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very broad.
It's true.
The copies of the Wax catalog.
Oh, it was terrible. But seriously, folks, I thought it was very poppy, and not in a way that I particularly like. I thought musically it was very good and very well recorded. But the first thing I said to Graham when I heard some of this stuff was, what happened to the 2 guitarists I know? Andrew Gould's a very good guitarist. Graham plays great guitar. What happened? It sounds like synthesizer heaven. Overdubs after overdub after overdub, just swamping basically good backing tracks. And I do agree with Graham. I found the lyrics very, very sugary.
It was kind of like, it was sort of pop music, whereas 10cc was had a lot more depth, you know.
Up with a twist.
Yeah,
I think there was something.
There's always another message with most of our tracks. We're usually trying to get a serious point across in a frivolous way with a lot of the songs.
Question. And so I guess it concludes this portion of the interview, but what were the 80s to you? How do you look back
Doing sort of sugary pop songs all over the place. Doing the 3 albums, sort of doing a lot of promotion things, and you know, travelling around a lot. So it was a very good time. I enjoyed it.
I enjoyed the 80s very much too, because, well, main thing working with Paul, who was certainly one of my writing heroes. And also, I did quite a lot of production for other people, which is something else I enjoy doing. Because with the 10cc, with all the earlier 10cc stuff, I used to engineer and mix everything for the band. And that's something I stopped doing on the latter albums. I didn't feel comfortable doing it. So I wanted to get back into it. So I enjoyed producing people like the ABBA girl, There was an English band called Sad Cafe, had some good hits with it. Quite a few other artists who never really made it. I did enjoy working for other people in that way. I will do at some time. At the moment, I'm in a 10cc mode, and that's what is of prime importance to me.
There's a lot of rubbish as well towards the end. I think a lot of when a lot of the sort of dance stuff started happening, and rap, which I've never really liked very much.
When you say dance stuff, what do you refer to? For example?
Well, lots of like the sort of Italian sort of house stuff. Like the sampled stuff.
Rave stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of the Euro disco out of control.
Right. This sort of black box kind of vibe. Which I never liked. I mean, I hated the idea of sampling stuff anyway.
I think the 80s was probably the weakest decade of the last 4 decades, musically. 50s were astonishing as the start of rock and roll. The 60s, we all know about the Beatles and groups of that era. 70s, some incredibly innovative bands came through, like Steely Dan, a lot of good English bands. The 80s seem to be very thin on the ground. The only ones I can really remember that come to mind would be groups like Police, Dire Straits, who were around in the late 70s, of course. Some of the Phil Collins albums I enjoyed, certainly his first album, first 2, I thought were fabulous. But again, looking back on it, it was the thinnest decade this century. Musically, yeah.
Uh-huh.
If you think about it seriously, you can go back to each of the decades. The war years were a bit sketchy, of course, but there was still good bebop music coming through there, and transition from big band to rock and roll bands. And the 30s were brilliant, and the 20s were fantastic. The 80s are pretty thin.
Turning back the hands of time here, it reminded him of your comments many years ago when punk started to get into vogue, and you commented publicly, Eric, that you were disgusted with the Sex Pistols. Looking back, how do you evaluate what punk was and how it evolved in the new wave, or what exactly new wave was?
Well, I remember my feelings at the time, and what really made me angry was the fact that there was nothing there that I could buy and enjoy. And I loved to buy other people's music, but there was nothing coming through that period that I could possibly listen to with any pleasure whatsoever. However, it was a great period for cleaning up what was happening in Britain, because it was getting boring. The latter part of the 70s, some of the major groups were becoming very, very self-indulgent and boring. And punk came along and said, stuff this. We don't want all this airy-fairy stuff. Let's do something, let's go back to basics. They also had their own audience too, of young kids coming up who didn't want to listen to the 15th Yes album or whatever. They wanted their own thing to identify with. And I know that because I've got children myself. So I think it was a very healthy thing that it happened. But there's still nothing from that period I could even listen to now and say, what a great track that was. Wow. Sid Vicious singing My Way. What do you say?
Although, interestingly enough, I believe it was Rolling Stone magazine called London Calling.
Yeah.
The best album.
But that is actually that is a good record, I think. That is a good record. But of course, you always get the odd good thing.
Yeah.
It's the fluke.
But it was a cultural thing, I mean, it was also so tied up in fashion as well. The things got blurred between what was. It's not just music, is it? It wasn't just a musical thing.
Yeah.
But it was. Eric said it was a healthy. Looking back on it, was a healthy thing.
Mm-hmm. We'll now get into questions on 10cc at long last. Here there are basically the three versions of the band. There were four of you, first of all, then there were two of you, and now the band is back again. What are the decisive, the more seminal points that define each rendition of the band?
Well, this one's really the same as the last one. I mean, there's no... After Kevin Lowell left, Eric and I decided that we were going to carry on as 10cc. And, I mean, this sort of incarnation of 10cc is... The only way it's different is in terms of the way that we made this last particular album. That wasn't a kind of our group. You know, when we recorded before, we had musicians with us that were on the road with us, that were always with us. People like Paul Burgess and Rick Fenn and Stewart Tosh. But this time we decided that, as we were sort of starting again, that it might be nice to use session musicians and bring in specialists to do specific jobs. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, well, at least the latest incarnation, I suppose.
Yeah.
And, well, I guess so we're just to assume, like, the first version of the band is different from the second in that Lowell and
Kevin
left. It was just,
Yeah.
That's
That's
pretty much says it all.
Yeah.
Yeah. What more can you say?
What more can you say?
で、なんですね。で、
The Japanese public had been made aware of the possibility of the band reforming. I think as early as last spring, or spring of last year, he said. And a lot of the fans here were expecting more of a contribution from Kevin Lowell, whereas in the final product, I guess they're just doing vocals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what happened there was something that was rather irritating and has been irritating and will be irritating to us in the future, was that we always knew that what Kevin Lowell's contribution was going to be, and it was going to be that they were going to do some backing vocals and maybe play something, or they were going to be like special guests. But the impression, certainly from our British record company, was they gave out to everybody, for obvious reasons, was that 10cc had reformed and it was going to be the four original members. And this really gets up our noses, believe me. Because we never said it, we didn't want to mislead people, but people have been misled, and so consequently this thing keeps coming back time and time and time again. The fact of the matter is, when Kevin Lowell left in 75, Eric and I decided to carry on. We actually sold more records, if one wants to judge success by selling records, and I certainly do. We sold more records after Kevin Lowell left than before.
Is that right?
We did. I mean, Things We Do for Love, which is Eric and myself, actually sold more records than I'm Not in Love. It's maybe not going to be as famous in the long run, but that's a fact, And our albums got to higher positions in the charts also. So it's a constant irritant to us that we're sorry, but we didn't tell everybody ourselves that Kevin Lowell were going to be,
Guests.
back in the band again.
Yeah, so it's the record company's leak.
That convenient leak.
Yeah.
And we'll have to carry all the crap, but
Yeah. Well, what on earth did Graham and Eric do to turn off poor Lowell and Kevin?
Yeah, I
guess
know,
is the public position. On behalf of many a 10cc fan, there was the popular perception that you two guys were sort of the Tin Pan Alley pop specialists, and Kevin and Lowell gave the unit more of a conceptual depth, conceptual twist, if you will, which may be very unfair. Would you care to set the record straight on this matter? That popular perception does exist among 10cc fans in Japan. He feels.
I think if you break down the hit records, you'll find that Graham and I wrote 99% of them. But that is what success is gauged by, the number of records you sell. Graham and I wrote I'm Not in Love, which is probably our most famous song. Kevin Lowell in the studio certainly added another dimension to 10cc, which was very beneficial at the time. That they were slightly off-the-wall thinkers, and when you get four guys in a room writing and creating the albums we did, the chemistry was very exciting. However, it's something you cannot continue to work with. Four things working towards one aim is great. Four brains working in opposite directions becomes terrible. And that's what really happened with 10cc, and two guys wanted to go and develop this, the gizmo instrument. So I can't say that 10cc after Godley and Cream had left was worse, because we had more record success.
It was different.
It was different.
What about this, addressing this conceptual side?
I think what it is, I mean, I think certainly that Kevin Lowell were more sort of avant-garde, if you like. But the thing that made it work was, okay, I'm sorry, but we were more probably commercial. But what was interesting was the sort of push and pull between their avant-garde and our commerciality that made it really, really work very well. I mean, actually, I'm Not in Love is a very good example of a song that we wrote, and it was Lowell who came up with the idea for the choir, which is, no doubt about it, one of the milestones in modern record production ideas. There's no doubt about it. So there's a good example of the two things working so well together. But what was good was that they would write things and we would sort of act as editors for their songs, and they would act as editors for our songs, or change the rhythms. So it complemented each other. But I would agree to an extent that was what you say is true.
I guess it's a thorny issue because people tend to equate avant-garde with credibility.
Right, I don't mind. I don't give a shit about that. I mean, I think we wrote and write fantastic, popular music, and really, thank you very much. We've done very well out of it.
Right.
All right.
Right.
Just reiterating the last point I was making there, saying that in the case of pop music, it has to be a very high quality. You have to adhere to very high standards. Perhaps what the other two guys were trying to do on their own was not of as high a standard, and therefore considered maybe more credible, more just, which is the injustice, of course, is to you guys, because you had.
Yeah. You mean just because you're avant-garde, you're given more credibility because you're appearing to be more creative?
No, just because you're less perfect. You're considered more credible.
Less successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
So the nobility of low quality, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, he was just saying that's why it would be considered injustice for themselves.
Right.
実際その
The word pop music has crept up in this conversation many, many times now, and he is assuming that in the 1992 version of 10cc, you will attempt to interpret pop music in a modern 1992 context. Is that true, first of all? And in doing so, how would it be different from before?
I don't think we would interpret 1992 pop music. No, we wouldn't. We would write 10cc music.
Yeah, that's what it is.
That's what it's down to. We don't follow trends. We don't follow the charts. What's the point? I mean, 10cc are going to do a rap track, or a house track, or an acid track. We can't do that. We write what we instinctively feel is good. What turns us on? We're not actually. I mean, it's great that the public buy it and like it, but that isn't the bottom line when we go in the studio. The bottom line is we're doing something we enjoy doing. It's a bonus that somebody actually likes it and buys it. It's great.
Fortunately, that we have that over our careers. We've had that nice coincidence that people like what we like.
Yeah.
you guys define 10cc music as the music you happen to want to create, the music you happen to like. And from our perspective, that happens to be very good pop music. What other bands do you see achieving the same thing now? What other bands do you see as like contemporaries, on a par with yourselves?
Now,
Yeah.
I think there's not the people like maybe Tears for Fears. I think have the same kind of motivation for quality that we do. I think they're quite similar to us. Crowded House to a certain extent. Those are the only two I can think of, sort of off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, those are definitely purveyors of top-notch pop,
Yeah.
you might say.
yeah.
Eric, would you add any?
The Tears for Fears is a very good example, I think. Deacon Blue have done a couple of interesting albums, which I quite like. There's not much else around that I would go out and buy myself and enjoy. It's very difficult.
Or maybe it is around, it's just not making it to
It's around and not making it yet. That's a
no,
tough
I'm
one.
just saying maybe stuff you would buy, it's just not, it's around, but you're
It's not
getting
commercial,
access,
yeah.
You're not getting access to it, it's not being publicized.
Not being, I would always go and buy a Raikuda album and drool for days and play it forever and think it's wonderful. But apart from a few thousand people in Britain who will go and see the concerts, he can't sell records. It's a tragedy.
Yeah.
The guy's got more talent than 15,000 other bands in the world combined. But that's the interesting thing about music. It's not always predictable.
Not always fair either.
Not always
No,
fair.
But
Yeah.
that's one of the attractions of the whole business. You can be sitting at home, it's very quiet, and suddenly the phone rings. You find out, a song that you wrote 5 years ago is going to be in a film, or you're going to do this, you're going to do that. There's a whole thing, all your past catalogues out there, doing its own thing, squirming around out there.
Graham, how many songs do you have out? How many songs are actually cataloged?
Hundreds.
It's hundreds.
There are hundreds.
Yeah.
I've never actually counted them because it seems the most boring thing in the world to me. When someone says, and this songwriter has written 500 songs, who cares? Did he write one hit? No. So what does it matter? People always think it's very impressive that you've written 1,000 songs. No, it isn't.
I must say I'm fascinated though when we have a thing in Britain called the PRS, which collects royalties from around the world for you.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that used to happen in the studio, because once on a PRS form, I saw that we got some royalties from Bolivia. From Bolivia. I thought, wow, who down in Bolivia is buying our stuff? So we'd go in the studio, we'd be recording something, and Graham would say, that's not good enough. And I'd say, what about the guy in Bolivia? Is this good enough for him? It became a standing joke, but I was always fascinated.
That guy in Outer Mongolia.
Out to Mongolia. Wow.
Did you ever find out who
No.
or what happened?
No. No, but it's fascinating that as you write songs all the way around the world, there are people in the most obscure places buying them. I mean, I must say, I'm very surprised this time in Japan that so many people know about our music and the music now. I'm pleasantly, I must say, I'm delighted. But I'm quite surprised at the awareness of 10cc in this country.
Let me say one thing, just reminded me of what Eric was saying. What's so nice about it is, people will phone you up that you haven't spoken to for a long time. They'll suddenly phone up and say, I was in the elevator and Things We Do for Love came on, and I thought, I must give you a ring and see how you are. It's like the music acts as a reminder of us. It's really nice. Just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah.
It's really nice. Go for it.
Just wondering, I guess this reflects back on what you were originally talking about and how there's this sort of a black hole exists in current popular music. There's not the type of that there's a lack of the type of thing you guys do best. Do you think one thing that got you back into the fray was sort of a sense of mission, a sense of duty that you sort of had to provide this very essential element of this?
It's interesting. An interesting way of putting it. I wouldn't call it a sense of duty. A very, very pleasant duty to be asked to do something that you enjoy doing anyway. That's a great thing. But we do feel there is a hole. And maybe if we can influence other bands again, as we certainly did in the 70s, I think it would be a plus for music. Yeah, because the charts, especially in Britain at the moment, are sad. They're abysmal. And records are not selling. You know, number one can get there with 30,000 sales. That's unheard of even 2-3 years ago. That's a reflection on what is happening, what is being released in Britain at the moment is not good enough. There are 56 million people there. You get a number one with 30,000 sales. That's pathetic. So there is a massive gap and a mass of people who are not being given music they like. Hopefully we can help that situation.
That sounds like a sense of mission.
Yeah, but I'm not doing it as some sort of religious thing. You know, if people buy it, I'm delighted. If they don't, you know, it's their loss.
Yeah. Remy, you think that?
No. Said it all, right?
Okay, I guess that concludes the interview then. I don't know if we need any extra photos. Shashiva.